following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Thank you, Telly Olson. We are back. Retro Rangers in the Zone. I'm Ralph Tycho of the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, and it is my pleasure to introduce the host of the show, George Grimm. George, how are you?
Thank you, Hal, and welcome back to Retro Rangers podcast. I'm George Grimm, and I'm here with my co-host, former Associated Press sports writer and author of many books on many sports, Hal Bock. Hal, how you doing?
Hi, George. I'm good.
Good. Now, this evening we're going to talk about how the publishing industry has changed over the years and my new book, Guardians of the Goal. So, Hal, where do you want to start?
Well, I want to start with your new book. I'm blown away by the detail and the complete compilation of what seems to be every goalie who ever stood between the pipes for the Rangers.
That's what I tried to do, yeah.
I'm in awe of the research that you did to come up with all of the details on all of those goalies. Many of the names I never heard. I don't remember seeing, and they were in my time, covering baseball and covering hockey and every other sport. But I thought it was a remarkable book.
Thank you. Well, actually, I always enjoy doing the research more than the writing, but one thing leads to another, As an old goalie, an old and longtime Ranger fan, I always looked at some of the names on the Ranger roster of goalies, and I knew some of the names and some of them I didn't, and the ones that I didn't know anything about them. So I looked them up, and one thing led to another, and I put the book together. And I tried to get everybody in there, even the practice goalies, which were very important back in the day before, I guess, 1965, when the NHL said you had to carry two goalies, and there's some very famous people who were practice goalies for the Rangers, and I just tried to carry it up through Hal Winkler, who was the first goalie, through Alexander Georgiev, who is now the Ranger backup goalie for Lundqvist, and I tried to give a feel of how the game has changed, how goalies were held back in the early days. They weren't allowed to fall on the puck. They weren't allowed to freeze the puck. They couldn't really leave their crease. And how the crease got bigger, and how the pads got bigger, how the pads evolved, and that's what I tried to do, and I hope I did that.
Oh, I think you did a wonderful, wonderful job. I've always had a soft spot in my heart for goaltenders because my son, when he was 7 years old, decided that was what he wanted to do.
Okay.
And so my wife and I, bought him all kinds of equipment and watched him stand in the net and become a target, and
sure.
It was not easy on his parents, believe me.
Yeah.
But he survived, thank God, and he had a lot of fun. He enjoyed it.
Yeah.
And so I've always felt warmly towards goaltenders. I particularly wondered, I know the rules have changed a great deal since I covered the game, including the shootout, which we have after an overtime period on a tie game. And I would like to know, I'd like to one day, if I was still writing, and I'm not, but if I was still writing, I'd do a survey of goalies and what they think of the shootout rule, because it's like facing a penalty shot every 30 seconds,
Sure.
And I don't get it. I mean, I know it's exciting. I guess it's exciting for the fans, but I feel badly for the goalies because they're putting too much of a burden on the goaltender to decide the game. I just wondered how you thought about that. What you thought about that?
Well, the shootout is a gimmick. It was brought on when they came back from the lockout season, and it's a shame because hockey is a team sport, and you play 60 minutes plus a short overtime as a team sport, and then you bring it down to two players, the shooter and the goalie, and it's not a team sport anymore. And I don't see any reason why they can't just, close off with a tie. That's what they did that for many years, and why they can't do it now. Goalies have a hard enough time. They rarely get credit for a win, and they very often get blamed for a loss. Jacques Plante once complained that how would you like it if every time in your job you made a mistake, there was a red light that went on over your desk and 15,000 people called you a bum. And
don't forget
true.
the siren.
Yeah, that's what I mean, sure. And it's not fair, to the goalies to put all that pressure on them for the game. But hopefully someday they'll change it when people get tired of it. So. With the NHL, nothing's written in stone.
I don't know that you can go backwards. I think once you've introduced a rule like that, and once you've introduced a segment like that, it's hard to get rid of it. I don't think they ever will, which just troubles me. I just don't think it. I agree with you. It's a team game, and all of a sudden, it's the goalies. It's in the goalie's glove, really. Whether the game is won or lost, and that's not fair. Not fair to the goalies.
No. So, but that's the way it is right now. So, but that's what I try to do with the book, and I hope I achieve that. As far the book outlines 8 franchise goalies who each had a unique relationship with the Rangers and who set the bar for those who followed. And those were Davy Kerr, Chuck Rena, Gump Worsley, Ed Jockerman, John Davidson, John Van Beesbrook, Mike Richter, and Henrik Lundqvist. They were all what you would call franchise goaltenders. But that's not saying that some of the other guys like Jules Villemure or Steve Baker or some of the other guys who played with the Rangers at those times, Bob Froese, weren't good, but they just didn't get a chance to play that often or to shine that much.
People forget that one of the greatest goalies in hockey history, Terry Sawchuk, was a Ranger for a very brief period of time.
That's right.
Near the end of his career.
Yeah. In fact, when you think of the golden age of goaltenders, where there were only six teams and 6 goalies, the Rangers had 3 of them at one time. They had Gump Worsley, they had Johnny Bower, briefly, and they had Terry Sawchuk. 3 of the top goalies of their era. They had them. They passed through their crease at one time or another. So. Well,
I found one of the things, and I knew this because when I worked for the Rangers back in the '60s. Of course, Gump was the goalie. Gump Worsley was the goalie. So I knew his story. Gump won the Calder Trophy as the Rookie of the Year. I forget what year it was, 55 or thereabouts. Mm-hmm. And the next season he was sent down. He was sent to the minors because he had asked for a $500 raise. And in that that era, $500 was an enormous sum of money.
Yeah.
And I guess it was Johnny Bower that they turned the job over to. Mm-hmm. But, it just made me laugh. And I think Gump was angry about that for the rest of his stay in New York. I think it bothered him a great deal. He was an angry man. I think having people shoot the puck at 90 miles an hour at you probably doesn't help your disposition either.
No. Well, he had the Rangers in front of him too. When he was in Montreal, he won 2 cups in Montreal. Now that would have never happened with the Rangers.
I'm glad of that. I'm glad that he had his name on the cup. Because he deserved it. He was a terrific goaltender. Yeah.
Now Jacques Plante came down here, and when he was in Montreal, he won 7 Stanley Cups and he won 7 Vezina trophies. And when he came down here, he faced more shots, he faced more rebounds. He had the Rangers playing in front of him instead of Montreal, and he didn't last, that long at all. I think he played 1 full season, and then the next year he was up and down from Baltimore in the American Hockey League, and it just didn't work out for him. So.
I used to, when I worked for the Rangers, my office was essentially in the balcony of the building, and we had a door that went. When you walked out that door, you were in the balcony, literally in the balcony of the arena. And so you would walk out that door at the start of the game or just before the start of the game to get to the press box. And I would look down on the ice, and I would see Jock warming up for the Canadians and think to myself, oh, my, Gump has got to play a shutout tonight in order for us to get a point.
That's
because you knew that Plante was not going to give anything up. He was that good with the Canadians. I mean, he was just he was the class of the league, I thought, at that time.
The book contains a little story that you told me about, Jacques Plante, that the net was too big, I think.
Yeah, it's true. True story. And all of the participants except me are no longer with us, so I can tell the story. What happened was that Jacques was a perfectionist, and he decided that the nets in New York were a little too wide. There was something wrong with the nets in New York. So he complained to the league. And Clarence Campbell was the president of the National Hockey League at the time. He called Muzz Patrick, who was the general manager of the Rangers, and he said, "What is this all about? Can you check this out?" So Muzz went to our department, the publicity department, and he asked Herb Gorin to find out if this was true. And Herb dispatched me, since I was the low man on the totem pole. He dispatched me, and I went down into the bowels of Madison Square Garden with the building superintendent, a guy named Dick Donapria, and we measured the nets. And I'll be darned if Plante wasn't correct. The nets were wider, were too wide. They were a couple of inches, maybe 3 inches too wide. And I thought, oh, my God, this is terrible. You know, I mean, we've now discovered something that really upsets all of the records of games that were played in Madison Square Garden.
Right.
So I went upstairs to our office, and I reported this to Muzz. I went into Muzz's office, and I said, Mr. Patrick, Plante is right. The nets are not regulation. And Muzz put his finger to his mouth and said, shh. And listen, you don't have to ask me twice, you know.
Yeah.
And I just went back to my desk, and he ordered new nets from Jerry Cosby, who you're familiar with, who had a sporting goods store in the at the street level of Madison Square Garden.
Right.
And we got new nets. The next game, we had new nets. And I don't think they ever admitted it to Plante or ever told Plante.
No, probably not.
That was the case. That's a true story.
Yeah. He was a character, Plante. But, you know, all goalies were basically. All goalies had to be a little off-center back then to play without a mask, you know.
Well, the whole idea of being there and, without a mask, and guys are coming down with... I remember Glenn Hall once said, they talked about Rocket Richard, and the Rocket, French-Canadian, great, tremendous scorer, great player. He said of Richard, Glenn Hall said of Richard, that when he came down, it was like his eyes were flashing like a machine, a pinball machine.
Pinball machine.
And you can. That's a good word picture. I can just imagine what it's like seeing this guy coming down there with his eyes wide open.
Sure.
Looking to put the puck behind you, you got to be very brave to be a goaltender, even today with all of the equipment that they have.
Yeah. But in the old days, they would get hurt, and they had to go back in most cases, unless they were really seriously hurt. They had to go back in. They could get stitched up. They could get their nose straightened out. Emil Francis told the story about how the Ranger guy put his head up against the wall and put both his hands on his nose, on the side of his nose, and just pushed it, straighten out his nose. That had to hurt, and then he had to go back in the game. So you figure that had to be throbbing, And,
I'll say.
Yeah, and you have to worry about getting hit in the nose now, and plus stopping the puck. So it's not easy. But then,
Plante, of course, had a part of hockey history in Madison Square Garden. Yeah. He was playing against the Rangers with the Canadians, and Andy Bathgate hit him in the face with a shot and opened a big wide cut. so he had to go off the ice to be stitched up. And he told Blake, who was the coach at that time, he said, "I'm not going back without the mask." He had used the mask in practice.
Yeah.
And Blake was flabbergasted because nobody wore a mask in those days.
No.
This was 1959, I guess.
Yeah.
And Blake didn't know what to do. The choice was allow Plant to go back out with a mask, or use the emergency goaltender, who in those days was a guy named Joe Schaefer.
That's right.
Who could play goal about as well as I could. And, there were 2 points at stake here. So Blake thought about it for a while, and he said, okay, put the mask on. And that was a turning point, because that was the first modern goaltender to wear a mask in a game. And again, that's Jacques Plante, It had been done before, by the way. In my book, one of my books, I did a book. One of my first books was the Complete Encyclopedia of Ice Hockey.
Right.
One of the books I'm really proud of.
I have it.
And in doing the research for that book, I found out that there was a goalie named Clint Benedict, who was one of the great goalies of the dark ages of the NHL, the early years. And Benedict wore a mask.
Yeah.
So it was not the first time when Plante put that mask on. It was not the first time that a goalie wore a mask in a game. It was the first time in modern NHL history that happened.
Right.
So,
but the Rangers have had a lot of good goalies and not so good goalies. Some who are known more for their character or their eccentricities than stopping the puck, like Gilles Gratton. He had that lion mask, which he said he got from looking through a copy of National Geographic, and he had painted up like a lion, and he was known for that. And he was also known for streaking and for just being a real nut job. He used to do a little dance when he didn't have to play. John Ferguson used to come in the Ranger dressing room and throw a puck to either him or John Davidson. And if he threw it to John Davidson, that meant that Gilles Gratton didn't have to play. So he would get up and do a little dance because he didn't want to play. He didn't want to be here. But
that's one I didn't know.
Yeah, he was only playing hockey so he could get money so he could meditate, because he was into meditation and going to ashrams and things like that in India. So he needed the money for that. So,
the war years were a terrible time for the league and more so for the Rangers, because all the players were gone, and the Rangers used a goalie named Steve Baczynski. And
the puck goes
he was so bad that they started to call him Steve Baczynski, the puck goes inski.
Right. Which
was not a very nice thing to say about a goalie, but poor Steve had the burden of that name.
Yeah, he was actually bow-legged, which, if you're a goaltender, that's not a good thing to be.
Oh, you don't want to be bow-legged, no.
No. But those years too, they also had a goaltender named Lionel Bouvret, who, it was the last game of the 42-43 season, I think, and the Rangers were in last place. They were not going to make the playoffs. And the goaltender they had been using was a guy named Bill Beveridge, and they had gotten him on a loan from the Cleveland Barons of the American Hockey League. But the Barons were going into the playoffs, so they wanted Bill Beveridge back. So it was the final game of the Rangers season at home, playing Montreal, and Montreal had to win the game to make the playoffs. And since the Barons wanted Bill Beveridge back, the Rangers didn't have a goaltender for that game, no goalie. So the Montreal Canadiens offered to loan them one of their farmhand goalies, a guy named Lionel Bouvret. And he came in, he gave up 6 goals to the Canadiens. They won 6-0, and Montreal made the playoffs. And it's fishy. It smells fishy. It looks fishy, it smells fishy. But I couldn't find anything where anybody raised any kind of hell about it. So I guess it was just something that happened,
It was a different time.
Yeah. Even the fact that when Worsley got hurt on the road, like playing the Red Wings, they had trainers who would go in and play goal for the Rangers. They had a guy named Danny
Lefty Wilson
Oleszewicz.
was one.
Lefty Wilson.
Lefty Wilson was the Detroit Red Wings trainer, and he was their emergency goaltender.
Yeah.
And Joe Schaefer was a statistician here in New York.
Mm-hmm.
These were guys who got a couple of tickets to the game and were told to stand by in case anything happens.
Yeah.
That's not big league. That's not exactly major league, and I think the league finally figured that out after a while.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, you have to figure, someone like a Schaefer, over the weekend he would do that, and he would go in, Monday morning in the office, and then people would say, well, how's your weekend? Well, this is what I did last night. I played golf for the Rangers, and that must have been something, to talk about. So,
I'll say.
But the Rangers had a lot of practice goalies through the years too. They had Jerry Cosby was a practice goalie for the Rangers from the 1940s on for a little while. Arnie Knox, who later produced the Super Sales Show and Eyewitness News, was a practice goalie for the Rangers. Frank Brown, who just got the Elmer Ferguson Award from the Hockey Hall of Fame, has an essay in my book about how he was an after-practice goalie. After the regular practice was done, he used to get pads on, and he used to let the players shoot on him. And he wrote about how some players had harder shots than others. Some tried to hurt him, some tried to chase him out of the net, but he hung in there, and it was a really nice essay. And
Frank is a dear friend of mine, and because he worked at the Associated Press for a while, and he was a goalie, and he found out that my son wanted to be a goalie. My 7-year-old son, who's now an attorney, wanted to be a goalie. So Frank gave me his old goalie pads. And those were the first pads that my son used when he played intramural hockey. Mm-hmm. So I always, Frank and I are good friends. I always thanked him for that. I don't know if I thank him. Maybe that's a bad idea for him to give me the goalie pads. That was not great,
Well, it probably saved a couple $100.
I did a story, a freelance story about being the father of a goaltender.
Yeah.
And one of the things I did, which was a terrible, terrible thing to do for a father, we were at a rink here on Long Island, and it was a tough game. They were coming at my son pretty quick, and pretty hard. So I went down behind the net. They had like chicken wire fencing, and went down behind the net, and I started to yell at him and tell him, watch out for the trailer. So being 7 years old and not being able to hear what I said, he turned around and looked at me, and of course the puck went in the net.
Yeah.
And I learned my lesson that day. Don't try to help him. He's on his own,
Yeah, right. Yeah. And you are on your own when you're out there. It's a very lonely feeling sometimes,
You sure are. I also remember when I worked for the Rangers, that the old Madison Square Garden, they had their practice rink was on at the top of the building.
Right.
It was called Iceland.
Right.
And it was a public skating rink, which was also used by the Rangers for practice. And what we would do is invite the writers to come upstairs in the lunchroom, and watch practice. And that seemed like a pretty good idea. Until one day we had a defenseman named Irv Spencer.
Okay.
And Spinner was okay, except he couldn't skate backwards, which is not a good thing for a defenseman. If you can't skate backwards, you got a real problem.
Yeah.
And one day he got tangled up in the netting behind the net, behind the goal, and we had to rescue him virtually, And so there were all kinds of episodes like that. Adventures that we went through with that team. It's not a very good team. That was the year that Doug Harvey came and was player coach.
That's right. Yeah.
That was not a very good team, but there were a lot of not very good teams in those days in the Rangers. I mean, the war years, the Warriors were really a disaster for that team.
Yeah, they were very bad because all the players left. Some players left to join the army. Plus, Lester Patrick had thought that the league was going to fold up. Those years. So he went out and he sold his minor league players. He only held on to the New York Rover players. He sold a lot of his players. And then when the league didn't stop and it continued, the Rangers didn't have any players. So that's why that one year they went to the training camp without a goalie. That's why they had to bring in guys like Baczynski and guys like that, because they went to training camp without a goaltender. How do you do that? So, but that's what they did.
And yet there were times that Madison Square Garden hosted three teams: the Rangers, the Rovers, and the Americans.
The Americans, yeah.
We had three hockey teams playing in the same building.
That's right.
So there were good times and there were bad times, I'm afraid,
Actually, Red Dutton was the president of the Americans, and he's the guy who supposedly put a curse on the Rangers, that the Rangers would not win a Stanley Cup while he was still alive, because they went at the war years. They didn't play during the war years, and they were hoping to come back when the war was over. But when the war ended, the Rangers wouldn't let them back in, or the Rangers voted against letting them back in the league. And Red Dutton, that's when he put the curse on the Rangers. And Dutton died in 1985, and the Rangers didn't win until 1994. So, that was the curse of Red Dutton. But the Ranger franchise has been very interesting. Haven't been very good most of those years, but they have a lot of interesting players.
Well, the first book that you did, we did everything but win.
Right.
Meaning win the cup. I thought was a good example of a team that really was very competitive. They were up there every year.
Yes.
But something would happen in the playoffs that just couldn't get over the hump.
Yeah. Right.
And so I thought that was a very smart idea for a book, and you pulled it off pretty well, I thought.
Amo put together some really good teams, but as you said, they just didn't. Something always happened. They always had
something
injury,
always happened.
Which you can't blame injuries because everybody gets injuries. Players that you would have hoped would have come up big during the playoffs, they didn't. And the other teams always had either Bobby Hull or Bobby Orr, and it's hard to beat those guys.
Exactly.
They did beat them eventually in different series at different times, but when, like in 1972, when it was that was the year that the Rangers should have won, 1972, because that was the year they really had everything going for them. But then a couple of games before the end of the season, Jean Rattel broke his ankle when he got hit with a shot from Dale Ralph from the point, and that's all she wrote, as they used to say.
Exactly.
They would win, like the year that Pete Stemkowski won the game against Chicago in triple overtime. You would think that a game like that would really get the team fired up and really get their momentum going. Well, they went out to Chicago and they lost, and then that was the end of the end of that season. So that's just the burden that we have being Ranger fans. So.
And right now they're in another spiral. I mean, it's now 2020 almost, and the last time they won was '94. That's 26 years. It's a long time.
Have a long way to go. Yeah, well, it was 54 years, and now it's 26. It's just I'm just happy I saw one in my lifetime, and a
lot of people say that.
My father was around to see it, so that was good, and if they win, once more in my lifetime, that would be nice. But I'm not holding my breath, because
well, you never know. Stranger things have happened.
Yeah, but they do have a good young team, coming together now. I'm hoping that they stay together. I'm hoping that they stay together like the Islanders did before the Islanders won their 4 cups in a row, because they all came up together. They all won and lost together. They learned how to play together. And I'm hoping that this young Ranger team does the same thing. So, but we'll see. It's,
it takes some time, it'll take some time.
Yeah. The publishing industry, how has it changed? Let me ask you a couple of questions. Back then, when you wrote your book, when you wrote your books, when was your first book that you wrote?
Well, the first book I was involved with, I was working for the Rangers, and the late Bob Wolf, the great sportscaster Bob Wolf, was doing our games. And he came to me and he said, I've got a book that I'm going to write with Andy Bathgate. Mm-hmm. Andy Bathgate's Hockey Secrets. He said, the only thing is I don't have time to write it because, he's always on the road and he's always running around. He said, can you help me? I said, sure, I'd love to help you. And so I did a lot of the legwork on that book. That was the first one. The Complete Encyclopedia of Ice Hockey came out after that. Then came the Rod Gilbert book, Goal, My Life on Ice. Mm-hmm. We did that with Rod, and he remains a dear friend of mine, a terrific guy. Rod came up to the Rangers in my first year with the Rangers, and we were the same age. Okay. And the difference was he was a French-Canadian kid experiencing New York for the first time. And so he would come into our office, and we would get requests for appearances by the players. Can we get a player to come to a hospital? Can we get a player to come to a Boy Scout thing? Rod would go anywhere, everywhere, because that was, what else was he going to do? He barely spoke English at the time. And he became our go-to guy. So Rod and I became friendly. And so that book, I did that with Stan Fischler, who did the introduction for your goalie book. Mm-hmm. And from there, I branched out into other things. And I've done a lot of books. In fact, Guardians of the Goal could be considered a sequel to one of my books. I did a book called Save, Hockey's Brave Goalies. And that was a fun book to do about goalies of the 70s, I guess it was. So I've done a lot of books. How the publishing industry has changed dramatically. First of all, in those days, in the early days, when I was writing books, there were bookstores. There are very few bookstores left now. I mean, there are Barnes & Nobles. There's a Barnes & Noble not far from my home. But by and large, books are sold on the Internet by Amazon and BarnesandNoble.com. So that's one major change. Another major change is publishers are not anxious to give advances now. In the old days, you could get an advance against your royalties. Yeah. Now, publishers say, get the royalties first, and then we'll give you your money. Yeah. So that's cast a little bit of a pall over the industry as far as I'm concerned. Yeah. I had a friend one time who was a writer, and one day he said, that's it, I'm going into administration at the AP. I'm going to be an administrator. I said, how can you do that? How can you give up writing? He said to me, I've said everything I have to say. And I kind of feel that way. So I'm not writing anymore, really, at the moment. If something came along, maybe I would, but right now I'm not writing anymore.
Yeah. What about the advertising end of it? Like when I get a book published, I go on Facebook, I go on Twitter, and within minutes, hundreds of people know about it, and whether they go out and buy it or not. That's
you're right.
Story.
The author today the author has to publicize his own book, and I did that with the last couple of books that I did, because the publishers just don't seem to be interested in doing anything to publicize the book. Yeah. Yeah. Now, if it's not going to be in the bookstores, and you're not going to publicize the book, how is anybody going to find out about it?
Yeah.
So that's I've done some radio stuff. That's not what I do. I'm a writer. I'm not a publicist, and I'm not a marketer.
Right.
So I mean, I've done some. I got a call one time. I did a couple of books back. I did a book about the Chicago Cubs.
Right.
The last Chicago Cubs dynasty, which was in the early 1900s. And I was very proud of that book, and I did it, and I waited for people to publicize it. Our publisher did nothing. And then one day I got a call, and he said, I've got a radio appearance for you. I said, oh, that's great. Where? What radio? It's WGN in Chicago. Well, WGN is one of the biggest stations in America, and it's in Chicago. And this is a Chicago Cubs book. Well, what could be better than that? Sure. So I said, sure. When and where, and I'll take it from there. And he said, okay, you call at 5 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday morning. They had me on the air. Mm-hmm. Now, the only people listening to the radio at 5 o'clock on a Sunday morning are people who are drunk from Saturday night. But that was the appearance they arranged for me. So that gives you an example. Yeah. Publishers, I don't know, if you're going to publish a book, why wouldn't you publicize it? But I found that that's not the case.
Yeah. The process of writing a book back then, everything was done on paper, right? You had to type
manual
on paper.
Typewriter.
Yeah.
A manual typewriter on paper.
Now, does that
mean
that?
One time, I did a book for the Associated Press called The Pictorial History of Baseball.
Right.
And I had a week in which to do the text. It was largely a picture book, but it did require about 30,000 words of text. And I had a week to do the book.
Wow. Because
they were going to do it, then they weren't going to do it, then they were going to do it, and they finally decided to go ahead with the project. And so I had a portable typewriter here in my home. I'm sitting at the same desk that I did this book on. Mm-hmm. And my wife went to work at 8 o'clock in the morning, and she would come home at 5 o'clock at night, and I would not have moved from that typewriter for about 6 or 7 days, and I wrote 30,000 words in a week on a portable typewriter. And it's one of my best books. I'm very, very proud of that book, The Pictorial History of Baseball. That was written in the 90s.
Yeah. Now, with the paper and the typewriter, when the editor sent back edits, that whole page had to be retyped, right?
Sometimes I got to see the edits, and sometimes I didn't.
Oh, okay.
But I was okay with that. As long as most editors will improve your copy. I've found over the years. Yeah. Some editors will bastardize your copy, and that I'm not appreciative of. But there's very little you can do as a writer. I mean, the editor has the blue pencil, and what are you going to do?
Yeah. Well, the two editors I had at Skyhorse now, they were both very good. I had Ken Samuelson for the first book, and Jason Katzman for the second book. They're both very good, so I have no complaints with that. I do, appreciate what they do because they go over every word and they go over every stat. They check your stats, and this book, the goalie book had more stats than the Emil Francis book, and so the stats came from hockeyreference.com, and that's an active site. And there's a lot of active hockey nerds out there, who go out and change these numbers. They update them. They find an obscure assist or a goal, and they update someone's numbers. And my numbers didn't match what they found online a lot of times. So I had to put something in the front of the book saying, all these it's active. All these numbers change periodically. So what's printed here in the book might not match what you find later on. But that's what you had to do.
Well, see, now we talked a little while ago about the Dark Ages. I went to work for the Rangers in 1961, and what I would do each morning when I came to work was look at the box score in the newspaper of the games. There would only be 3 games because there were only 6 teams. Right. So I would look at the box score, and I would take so-and-so got an assist, so-and-so got a goal, and I would update the statistics by pencil on my master sheets that I had of the 6 teams.
Yeah.
It was pencil and eraser kind of thing.
Yeah.
And in those days, we had a guy, his name was Jerry Aarons. Jerry Aarons was a hockey junkie, and he would spend the season from October until March in our office. Herb Gorin, who was the Rangers publicist, gave him a seat and a desk. Here, you sit here. You want to sit here? Sit here. And he would compile statistics of every game, every player. He had the statistics for every player who ever appeared in a National Hockey League game. My God, this is a gold mine. And that's how the encyclopedia was born. It was born with his register of players and numbers. Without him, we wouldn't have had that book. So
that was one of my first hockey books. It was big, thick book with everything you want to know about hockey at that time. It was great. So, it was very good. So, that's how the publishing world has changed. What about getting a publishing deal? Did you have an agent? Did you market it? Did you try to pitch it yourself?
No, I never had an agent. I had ideas, and I would pitch them to various publishers. Sometimes they would listen, and sometimes they would not. But no, I never worked with an agent. I did. I worked with one agent. The book, one of my recent books, recent years go by, when I was a kid growing up here in New York, I used to read the World Telegram and Sun, which was a newspaper, and they had a sports cartoonist named Willard Mullen. Willard Mullen is the guy who invented the Brooklyn Dodger bum.
Right. The bum, yeah.
And he was a magnificent artist, and his cartoons appeared in the World Telegram every day. And at some point, I decided that a new generation of Americans and readers should know about Willard Mullen. Mullen died in the 70s.
Okay.
And so I started to pitch this idea of the golden age of baseball, of Willard Mullen's baseball cartoons. And I got his family interested in the project, and they have a foundation, I guess. And they gave me the go-ahead and do it. And at that time, I found an agent who sold the book, and that's how that book was born. But it was born out of my persistence because I just thought that Mullen's work was so remarkable and so memorable that it would be a tragedy to have it lost to history.
Yeah.
So we have another book out there which contains Mullen's finest cartoons, most of them baseball.
Very
and it's really hit and miss pretty much. My last book was done with the cooperation of the AP. The AP, I pitched the idea to the AP, and they said it's a good idea. Let's do it. So that book is called Banned: Baseball's Blacklist of All-Stars and Also-Rans. And it's about players who've been thrown out of the game for one thing or another. And I don't know that I'll ever do anything more than that. That's the last book.
Okay. What about the thrill of actually seeing your book on the bookshelf? What was that like?
It always is a thrill, and you must feel it too. You must know the same feeling.
Yeah.
One time I was going out to lunch, and I passed a bookstore which had the AP book, the Associated Press Pictorial History of Baseball, which is the book I told you I wrote in a week.
Right.
And they had it in their window, and I thought, I've made it. This is nirvana.
Yeah.
It's the greatest feeling in the world,
Yeah, it's my book.
That's my book, exactly.
Yeah.
So,
very good.
I enjoyed the writing. I as you said, you enjoyed the research. I enjoyed the writing.
Yeah.
I always had fun writing, and it was a rewarding career for me, and I have no regrets. Let's put it that way.
The only thing that I don't like about the writing is is what I tell anyone who asks me about, should I be, if I want to write, what should I write? I always say that they should write something that they'd like to read, because throughout the editing process, you got to read the damn thing about 6 or 8 times. So
That's
read
right.
something you want to read, because it's just that's what you have to do.
Also, write what you know. Write what
you
know.
know. Yes, exactly. Because you can't
have
fake
a passion for something. That helps.
Yeah, because then it's not a job; it's something that you want to do.
Exactly.
All right, Hal. It's been a pleasure as usual.
Fun time. Always a fun time.
Good talking to you. See you next month sometime.
Okay, we'll look forward to it.
All right, Hal. Thanks a lot.
Okay, good night.
Good night. Thank you for listening to the Retro Rangers podcast. I'm George Grimm. That was Hal Bock. My book, Guardians of the Goal, is available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and wherever fine books are sold. Thank you very much for listening. Take care. Bye-bye.
The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.